Well, welcome everybody. I feel like, well, I can't see any of you, but maybe you feel like you haven't seen me in a while. It is great to be back with you on SIBA's Reader Meet Writer. My name is Wiley Cash, and I am the host of these events. We have been doing these for much longer than we thought we would be doing them. And normally we would be at a bookstore near you, somewhere here in the Southeast. But because we are not, we are bringing these events to you the best way that we know how, and that is virtually. We have gotten incredible support. And tonight, of course, we have Diane Chamberlain. We're going to be talking about her new book, and it is wonderful. We've been talking about it in the virtual green room before the event started. I read it compulsively and quickly and breathlessly, and I have no doubt that all of you will do the same if you haven't actually torn through it just yet. I'm thrilled to be here tonight with SIBA. SIBA stands for the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance. This is an organization that represents just under 700 independently owned bookstores throughout the Southeast. So perhaps you are here tonight because you are a huge fan of Diane's and you saw one of these local independent stores advertising this event. If that is the case, please thank them by purchasing Diane's book from that bookstore. You can do it online. I'm sure you can do pickup. I'm sure you can put on a very good, strong mask and go into the store. But let's support the independent bookstores. They need us now more than ever. I also want to remind folks that we have, or to tell folks we have another Reader Meet Writer scheduled for February 15th, Tuesday, February 15th at 7 p.m. I will be with North Carolina and West Virginia writer Misha Marin. She had a novel come out maybe 3 years ago called Sugar Run that a lot of you read, and I know a lot of you loved it. We'll be discussing her new novel, Perpetual West, which is just a great title. But as I said, I'm here tonight with Diane Chamberlain, which I'm very excited about. And if you have questions for Diane, please go to the bottom of your screen where there is the Q&A button there. Click on that and type in your question for Diane. Make sure you include your name and the name of your favorite independently owned bookstore, and I will ask Diane your question at the end of tonight's show. Questions are the best part. Writers love questions because we never change, the novel never changes, but the questions are different every time. So please don't hesitate to ask Diane some questions. So I want to welcome our guest. Diane Chamberlain is the New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of 28 novels published in over 15 languages. Her books include Big Lies in a Small Town, The Stolen Marriage, and The Dream Daughter. She lives in North Carolina with her partner, photographer John Pagliuca, and her Sheltie Cole. Her new novel is The Last House on the Street. And before I welcome her, I want to embarrass her by telling all of you that Diane was one of the first real authors I met after I became a real author. And she was so nice to me and has always been so kind and so supportive of me. And I am thrilled and honored to be with her tonight. So Diane, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm delighted it's you interviewing me, Wiley. That's really good.
Well, thank you for saying that. So we've already got some questions popping up. We've got almost 100 people watching this, Diane. This is fantastic.
That's great.
Thank you. Thank
Hi,
you so
everybody.
much. Thank you so much for taking the time. So will you tell us a little bit about this new book?
Sure. It's a dual timeline story. It's set in 1965 and in 2010. And there's a young woman in each of those timelines. And their stories, as you read, you'll think, how could these possibly be connected? But they both live on the same street, a generation apart. And there are mysteries on that street that tie them together. So it'll take you a while to figure that out. I hope it's a puzzle that you'll enjoy digging through. And it involves, the 1965 part is about a young woman named Ellie, who is, she's 20, and she is a student at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And she learns about a program called SCOPE, which is recruiting Northern white students to go into the South to register Black voters. Again, this is 1965, and it was right before the Voting Rights Act was signed. So at that time in the South, it was really hard for Black people to register to vote. They could lose their homes, they could lose their jobs, they faced intimidation and sometimes physical intimidation at the registrar's office. They were subject to poll taxes and literacy tests. So the Voting Rights Act was going to be extremely important. And the plan was for the scope young people to register, help people learn how to register once the act was, once the bill was turned into an act. And so then we jump to 2010, and Kayla Carter is a young architect, and she and her husband have designed this fantastic house at the end of a street. And the street is now being taken over by upscale homes that are just in the process of being built. And she and her husband have built this absolutely stunning, modern Frank Lloyd Wright type house deep in the woods. And her husband is killed in a freak accident as he's building the house. And so she and her 3-year-old daughter are in the situation where, do we move in or do we not move in? And one day she's at work. This is the first chapter of the story, so I'm not giving much away. She's at work, and a strange woman comes in to her office and starts letting her know that she knows a lot about her and warning her off of moving in there. And the woman wears aviator mirrored sunglasses. So Kayla can't really see her eyes very well, and she has on what's obviously a red wig, and is saying things like, you don't really want to move into the house where your husband was killed. You don't want to move a little 3-year-old girl into that house, do you? Those woods are so spooky. And so Kayla's a little freaked out, but she does move in, and it's down the street from the only old house that's on the street, which is where Ellie grew up. So these two women lived at different parts of the street at different times, and what connects them.
And there are a couple of things that, just based on what you said just now, that I want to talk about. You know, the Voting Rights Act, and please forgive me, I heard on the radio, I think it might have been yesterday or the day before, that in 1964, and I don't know if it was North Carolina or the entire South, the percentage of Black men and women who voted was 4%. And then by 1969, it was 59%. Mm-hmm. And so the Voting Rights Act was integral to giving a voice to millions of people throughout the South. And one thing that I really loved about the novel and Ellie's narration in 1965, you really feel the urgency of this youth. You feel the urgency of these religious leaders in these small rural communities where there are sharecroppers and people living, you know, well below the poverty line, trying to eke out a living. And you really feel the hopelessness, the desperation, but also the possibility of things changing. And I felt like it was such an evocative experience reading this, being from North Carolina, you know, kind of seeing North Carolina in a way that I had never seen it. Because there are things, you know, you kind of intuit as you're growing up. But, you know, I wasn't born until the 1970s. And so a lot of this stuff I missed. And I thought you just did a marvelous job rendering it for us.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was breathtaking in so many ways. So I know you were a teenager in 1964, 1965. So you were about 6 years younger than Ellie was during that time. Mm-hmm. And Ellie is a pretty innocent person in a lot of ways. Politically, culturally, sexually, she's an innocent person. And when she witnesses sit-ins, police violence, racial terror, she is shocked by them. Can you talk about your memories, not in North Carolina, of course, but your memories of seeing these things as a young person unfold on the television or in the newspaper, and how that was with you while you were writing this?
For me, I think my awakening, well, I have an awakening that when I was about 5, actually. It was my awakening to white privilege, although, of course, I didn't ever think of it that way at that time. But I grew up in a town that was about half Black. And my mother and I were riding in the car, and we came to a stop sign, and a woman was walking across the street holding the hand of a little boy. And the little boy had on this little suit and tie. And my mother said, "Oh, he is so adorable." And I said, I had to pick this up in kindergarten. I said, "But he's colored. Like, how could she possibly think he was adorable?" And she pulled that car over to the side of the street and she said, "If you feel that way, then you should thank God every day that you were born white." And it was like this little 5-year-old wake-up call. But then fast forward to when I was 14, and I would wake up to the radio every day. And the news came on, and they were talking about these 3 young civil rights workers from the North who went to the South, who were found murdered by the Klan. And I was like, what is civil rights? And so I started asking questions and exploring civil rights, especially related to my school. Suddenly I was aware of why a lot of my classmates were so angry. I hadn't really understood a lot of their behavior until then. And the more I studied, it became kind of a passion for me. And I would write my history papers on race and on civil rights. And it just became something that has always been part of me. There's always a touch of it in just about every one of my books. And it felt really good in this book to be able to sort of get it all out. Mm-hmm. So I just think it's still extremely important to me. And it, I went to my 50th high school reunion a couple of years ago. And when I look at the pictures of our group, and it's half Black and half white, and we're all mushed together. And it's just a really, really fine feeling to have kind of grown past those differences, at least to an extent.
Sure. Can you talk a little bit about the Ku Klux Klan in North Carolina in the 1960s, and how powerful it was, or how active it was?
Mm-hmm. It was extremely active in the 1960s. When the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964, it really brought people who were not happy about that out of the woodwork. And I mentioned, I think in somewhere in the book, that North Carolina had more Klanspeople, and more Klaverns than any other state in the country. And it was because of this Civil Rights Act. It just got people really up in arms. And it also had a lot of women involved. And there was almost a family atmosphere going on the rallies. There were constantly rallies up and down across the state, and they would be like a country fair kind of atmosphere, with Bob Jones, who was the Grand Dragon, talking, fire and brimstone from the stage and getting everybody riled up. So when Ellie and her fellow students arrive at the little school that they take over as their headquarters, they find that there's bullet holes in the windows, which the minister who's in charge says it's the welcoming committee. So they realize what they're up against.
And what I thought was so astute that you rendered in the novel, Diane, are all of the gradations of terror that the white supremacists are visiting upon these people, whether they be white organizers or Black sharecroppers or Black religious leaders, but then all the gradations of response that especially people in the Black community have to it. Some of them are undeterred. Some of them are unsurprised. Some of them are, dismissive's the wrong word, but they've seen it before. They knew it was coming. Now that it's here, here's what we'll do. But Ellie has never experienced anything like this. And can you talk about having a character see things that she has never had to be in the position to see, and what that is like writing a character like that?
Well, she lives in an upper middle class home, an environment. Her father is a pharmacist. She's a pharmacy student. And so she was raised to do well and to be comfortable. And it shocks her family that she wants to do this. They're extremely against her doing this. And one of the ways that these students, the students had to live in the homes of Black people in the poor areas that they were working in. And that kind of, when Ellie found that out, she was a little bit shocked, but she wanted to be treated like everybody else. And so I show her living, I believe it's in 3 different homes. They move her around because a white woman was attracting a lot of negative attention by living in these Black homes.
Especially because she's from the area too.
Well, that's a whole nother thing. She is a Southerner, and the SCOPE program was looking for Northern and Western students. They were not looking for Southern students because they felt that the Southern students would not be trusted by either white or Black. Mm-hmm. So she had to really fight to be able to get into the program. And her motivation, that's something as a writer I really had to work on, was her motivation. Why the heck did I bring this young Southern woman into this position? She has an aunt who is from New York and who was a very important person in her life. And her aunt had really radical for the time ideas. And Ellie was very moved by them. But Ellie also has her own secret reason for wanting to do this that comes out as we move through the story. So she is highly motivated, and she's very shocked by what she's seeing.
It's so funny you mentioned Ellie's aunt and the other reason that she takes the action that she does. And I'll be honest with you, I had forgotten both of those reasons. Of course, those were reasons that she did the things that she did. But I thought, those are obviously external reasons, but I thought internally you really did a great job of portraying Ellie as the kind of young person coming of age at a time of great cultural, social, political, racial upheaval, who is just innocent enough, but also intellectually engaged enough to see things with fresh eyes. And there are a couple of times where, she doesn't get caught up in the excitement of being an organizer. She knows what she's getting into. But there are a couple of things she sees, a couple of things she does. Once she realizes, when she barely sticks her toe into a couple of things, she thinks, this is important. This is vital. This is for me. And what I loved about it is that Ellie never stops being that person. Mm-hmm. That was so interesting to me. She was somebody who felt a responsibility and a calling, no matter whether it was 1965 or 2010. And
that's true.
Yeah, I thought she was just such a wonderfully drawn character. So I want to talk about the other character, Kayla. I think Kayla's 28, if I'm not mistaken, in 2010. She's the architect who's built this gorgeous house. And, I was really enjoying the descriptions of the house and the windows. But then as soon as she builds this house, these really eerie things start happening. And I won't get into them, but of course, the woman that you mentioned at the beginning of the discussion shows up at her office one day, but it doesn't stop there. Mm-hmm. And she's scared, and she starts digging around when these conversations come up. People tell her things like, well, you don't have to worry about all that old race stuff because things are different now. Barack Obama's been elected. People can vote now, whoever they are, things are so different now. But then by the end of the book, you show us, or you reveal to us, that they're not. So can you talk about writing a book in 2020, 2021, whenever you were writing this, that reflects on 1965, but kind of marrying these moments? What was going on in your mind as you were looking at the news or the newspaper, or in writing about 1965?
Anger and depression.
Sure. Yeah.
Because, there was so much accomplished in 1965 with the signing of the bill. It took longer than anybody expected. As a matter of fact, when the young scope workers are engaged in the summer to go out and try to register people, the bill had not been signed yet, where the expectation was that the bill would be signed before they ever started doing this. So it made their job doubly different. And in North Carolina, by the way, it was the only state that just closed the registrar's office. So they couldn't register anybody until the bill was signed. So as I'm working on this, and our news on the TV is just getting worse and worse in terms of the right to vote. And the reason for that, just a little bit of history to explain why this is happening. In 2013, the Supreme Court made a decision that things weren't as bad as they were way back when they signed the voting rights bill. And so they removed what's called preclearance. A southern state that had been trying to prevent people from voting could now do it without getting preclearance from the government. In other words, you could change your laws so that you could gerrymander, or you could not let people give you water in line, or you could cut out drop boxes, or you could cut back on Sunday voting. All of these things that the states started to do because they no longer needed to clear it with the government. So that's what's happening now. And it's happening at a very, very rapid pace. So I feel frustrated.
And here, an administration is trying to get another voting rights act signed into law.
And it's not going well.
It is not going well. You're right. We have quite a few questions, Diane, if you feel up to taking some questions.
Of course.
Becky, whose home store is Park Road Books, Becky asks, what was the hardest part about writing in a pandemic? I love your books and I love Park Road.
It was hard. You would think that it wouldn't be that hard because you're home and there's no place to go. But the pandemic just took a lot of psychic energy on, how can we get together and what kind of mask am I going to wear? And is it safe to do this? Your mind is just someplace else. But you also have a deadline and you're a professional. And so you get it done. Even if you get done a little bit late.
I'm always late. You're fine.
Me too.
Jill asks, how do you continue to get new ideas? Does writing get easier after 28 books or does it get harder?
I think it's always been hard, except maybe for the very first book, because the first book I knew what I'd wanted to write for so long that it kind of spilled out of me. But it's kind of easy when you don't have an agent and you don't have a publisher and you're just on your own. But then once all of that begins for you, it's just more and more of a challenge, and there is pressure to perform. So ideas are really hard for me. And every time I start a new book, like right now, I don't really know what I'm going to write about. And I'll be really honest with this book. I had two ideas. One was the young woman working for Scope. The other was a young woman who's in her office. At first, she was a therapist, and a woman comes in and tells her she wants to kill somebody. And so that's these two stories that came together, which honestly is so much fun for me to take two ideas that seem completely unrelated and figure out the puzzle. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping, I've got my one idea for the next book, and now I'm hoping to flesh it out with something else.
Well, you mentioned that she was a therapist. I guess this is Kayla's character who ends up being an architect.
Right.
And you were a practicing therapist and a social worker. How do your previous careers come to bear on the act of writing or your practice of writing?
I think they helped me understand people. I think that's really the bottom line. It was a great background for understanding people. But when I created Kayla, John, my partner, said, don't make her another therapist. Because I do go to that well kind of often. It just, to me, it's a natural fit for who I am. And so I did change her to be an architect, which actually worked out very well for
It was perfect. It was perfect. Samantha asks, and I don't know if you have a response to this now. This might be something that folks can find out on your website or on Facebook, but is there possibly a way to get a signed copy of this book? She is my all-time favorite author.
Yes. Is it okay if I mention some bookstores?
Sure.
Is that okay? I would check with Quail Ridge Books or Main Street Books in Davidson, North Carolina, or Page 158 Books in Wake Forest. And I will be sure to make sure that you've got a signed copy. And if you need a personalized copy, a couple of those stores, Quail Ridge and Page 158, I can always go into, and I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, so get a hold of those stores. Page 158 and Quail Ridge Books are right nearby for Diane and easy to get to. So give them a call and order a book. They'll put a note in it and she'll sign it for you. Speaking of those stores, our next two questions come from folks, one of whom is very closely associated with one of those stores, Barbara, who lives in the setting of this novel. She says, great discussion. When you came up with the story seed, Diane, were you thinking about the timeliness of this novel in terms of voting rights?
No, I really wasn't, because I started it long enough ago that things were lukewarm. They were not hot like they are right now. So that was just a coincidence. I'm not really thrilled by the fact that that it's timely. It is timely, and yet I'm not really happy that it's timely. I wish that we had this situation well in the rearview mirror, but we don't.
Yeah. The next question comes from Suzanne, and I can tell you, Diane, that Suzanne's favorite independent bookstore is definitely page 158 there in Lake Forest. Suzanne asks, I know this subject, and Barbara just before, you probably know who that is as well, Barbara Claypool White. Suzanne asks, I know this subject is a passion of yours and you know a lot about it, but while doing your research, did anything shock you?
I think I was really stunned by the watch out for white men in trucks. I kept encountering that in my research, that white men in trucks were the thing to fear. And if you were in an integrated group, there were Black students, local Black students who were working with the scope workers. And because they could they could approach a family in a house and the family would be more trusting of the white scope worker if they had a Black partner with them. But that meant that these white workers were walking around with Black partners. And it also meant that they had to really skedaddle if they saw somebody, a white man in a truck. They had to be very wary. So it was that kind of thing. And also reading in my research, I just want to mention this book called, I can't think of the title, but it's by Maria Gittin, Gittin, and it's about her scope experience, which I borrowed from liberally. What I love the most about her book is that she was 19 when she was a scope worker, and the innocence of a 19-year-old, the passion about the work that she and others were doing, but also at the same time, the poor judgment that sometimes teenagers have when it comes to relationships, partying. So I brought a little bit of that to Ellie too, to make it more realistic. And I really appreciated Maria's book because of how honest she was about the work that she was doing.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Joan. This is a question we haven't gotten before. Joan asks, who is your interviewer again? My name is Wiley, and Joan is joining us from J. Michael's Books in Eugene, Oregon. So I wanted to shout out the far west out there. We have a question.
Wait a minute. He's really good, isn't he? And his latest book is When Ghosts Come Home, and it's super. You must read.
Well, Alyssa is page 158 Books as well, and she asks, what is your approach to writing about racial discrimination as a white woman so that your portrayal of the Black experience is authentic?
Yeah, that is such a good question. I can't write authentically about the Black experience. I can only write from research and from talking to people. But what I did do through my publisher was have a sensitivity reader read the entire book. I felt like that was really important because I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't screwing up. There's things that I would not be aware of that a Black person would be aware of as they're reading the book. So the sensitivity reader really felt that I got it, that I nailed it. However, she did feel, and my editor agreed, that I should not have the N-word in there, even though it would have been used. I have Bob Jones, the Grand Dragon, saying colored boys, which is not what he would say. But I think in terms of sensitivity to any reader, we were cautious with our language. The other thing that the sensitivity reader talked about doing that I and my editor ended up not doing was putting a trigger warning at the start of the book, because there's some really sad things that happen in this book. Mm-hmm. We felt if it had been a young adult book, that a trigger warning would have been warranted, but for an adult book, we opted not to do that. So y'all can let me know if you think it should have been there.
I think that was the right decision. I also want to go back. We've still got a ton of questions coming in, but this, it would have been easy, Diane, for a less skilled writer to write a novel of big, chunky, melodramatic scenes of justice and, hope and desolation. But you don't allow that to happen. This is a very nuanced novel, a very nuanced portrait with a lot of really fine-tuned scenes, especially between, Ellie and Greg, the minister who has to accept her into the SCOPE program, between Ellie and Kayla at some points where we're just watching these characters feel each other out. It's just really nuanced writing. And there are also some truly terrifying moments and some really suspenseful writing. So, it's a historical novel, but it's also a very fine-tuned novel as well. Sometimes when we hear historical novels, sometimes I think, big ideas, big sweeping history. This is a very personal novel. We have a couple more questions I'm going to try to get to. We've got people from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Hello, Julie. We've got Columbus, Ohio. Hello, Miriam. Let's see. Andrea from Fountain Bookstore in Richmond. Let's see. All of these great comments and great questions. But Diane, I think we're pretty much out of time. This has been great, and we had a ton of folks tune in. So thank you for overseeing this huge crowd we've had tonight. We had over 100 people.
Thank you, everybody, for coming
in tonight,
for those great questions.
Well, thank you, Diane, for writing a great book. Y'all are going to want to read this one. It is great. If you plan on being snowed in or iced in this weekend, make sure you go out and get it before it happens. If you rely on an unmentioned bookstore named after a river to get this book to you, it will not arrive before the snowstorm. Your independent bookstore in your community has it right now, so go there and get it. And join us on Tuesday, February 15th with Misha Marin to discuss Perpetual West. Thank you all so much for joining us. Good night and good night,
everybody. Happy reading.